Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Exponential Show. Today it is a pleasure of mine to welcome Abhinandan Sekhri, the co-founder at Newslaundry. Thank you, Abhinandan, for taking the time to speak with us.
My pleasure, Mayank. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for hosting us in your office as well.
My pleasure.
Now, Abhinandan, just let's get straight to the point, right? And this is a question that we discuss with all of our guests, is your origin story. So what got you into the crazy world of entrepreneurship and perhaps even the crazier world of news?
I guess entrepreneurship, more than any motivation being an expertise or a field, I think it is more a personality type. People who want to work for themselves are people who want to work for themselves. So whether they are chefs, whether they are software engineers, whether they are media professionals, I guess you know quite early. So while after I finished my graduation, I got a job with Newstrack, which is part of the India Today group. It was on VHS tapes. It was a news magazine. I knew pretty much very early when I started working. I was still a 3 or 4 or 5 months short of my 21st birthday. I was 20.
Right.
I knew by the end of the year that I would want to do something on my own. But media wasn't exactly a booming space in the mid 90s in India. Doordarshan was the only channel. There were 4 or 5 other channels that had just come like 2-3 years ago. So it wasn't a booming space. But yeah, so I worked there for about 4 years. And this is still before all the private news channels had come about. It was all still on Doordarshan. And my co-founder Prashant and he was also at Newstrack. We set up a production house and we got a little bit of work here and there. It was a struggle to begin with, but we were happier not, and then the channel boom happened. A lot of our colleagues got very good jobs because suddenly within like about 5 to 7 years, India went from 4 channels to about 200. Boom.
Right.
But somewhere along that line, you also needed programs and TV shows.
Right.
And there were not enough Indian production houses. So our production house slowly but steadily got going.
Nice.
And then we started making non-fiction, lifestyle programming, documentary films, a few medium to small budget ad films. But because Prashant and I had our roots in news, even he was a news professional.
I see.
He wasn't a reporter. He was a reporter in the beginning, but then he was a producer of our show. It was a news show. News was always somewhere at the back of our head. It was an obsession. I think it's an addiction, news, like many other toxic things. So while we were never making news shows, we were always watching news all the time. And Newslaundry was just a passion project because touch wood, our production house was quite successful. It wasn't VC funded, it was organic growth, and we had some excess capacity. So we started a website and it got noticed, it did well, and then we kind of made it its own thing.
Nice.
So it became a separate company. And yeah, news is unlike any other business. I think only people who are in it really understand just how different it is.
Right.
The conventional logic of demand and supply don't apply. The conventional logic of optimum allocation of resources don't apply. It's a completely different space, but it's exciting.
I can imagine. But yeah, it's interesting to know that you knew your calling as an entrepreneur, at least very early in your career, because a lot of us have to stumble our way through several years of corporate life before we get to that point.
I don't know. I mean, I've been doing a podcast with entrepreneurs. I'm just curious. Have you come across any whose journey to entrepreneurship started in their 40s or? Yeah.
Yes. So there's, in fact, our first episode was somebody who was very successful at a startup as a CFO, if I remember correctly, and then they made a successful exit, and then that was the launch pad to his.
But his first gig was also as a founder, or
no, it was
as an employee
under founders. So he was working closely with founders, for example, but he wasn't a founder himself.
Nice.
So I've seen a few people who, especially from a capital perspective, that's a great age to start, right? If you're in your 40s, you have some money to sort of a cushion when you're starting a business, so to say.
Yeah, but I mean, at least what I've, in my experience as an entrepreneur, in the journey, capital, access, contacts, business idea, quality of your product, etc., are of course important. At least what I've realized is that, and not enough people speak about this, because I have attended a few festivals at these universities. They call founders,
right,
and everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. I don't get the obsession with that. I mean, there's no virtue of being an entrepreneur as opposed to being an employer or manager.
Absolutely.
I mean, different people enjoy. I mean, some people like playing midfield, some people like playing back. I'm a football nut.
I've heard, yes.
So, I mean, who's to say that the defender or the goalkeeper is, less valuable than the right winger or, whatever it is. But I just think that there is an unnecessary value given to entrepreneurship. And in so doing, people don't talk enough about the emotional cost of entrepreneurship. It is
very true.
Very stress inducing. It is not for everybody. Some people enjoy stress, they revel in it. Some people get depressed and upset, and because they shut down, it impacts their self-esteem. I myself know one guy who really struggled. He just didn't have I had known him for years. He was a fantastic guy, really smart, probably smarter than me, but he didn't have the emotional, temperament of an entrepreneur. He wasn't stress tested as a piece of intellectual capacity.
Right.
That stress testing, he had not gone through life of stress testing.
I can imagine.
And his startup didn't work out for no fault of his, like many startups don't.
Of course.
It's there are a variety of reasons, and that took a huge toll on his self-confidence even later. And if I were to advise him, 30 years back, I'd say, dude, don't start your own company.
Right.
You are a fantastic manager. Let the headache of compliance, raising capital, the struggles of, dealing with all sorts of things, be with someone. You focus on what you do best. But he, for some reason, thought there's some, virtue in being an entrepreneur. So the only thing is that emotionally, are you equipped to be an entrepreneur? For me, that is the most important thing you have to realize. Access to capital, ideas, HR is secondary.
Of course. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I don't think it's talked about enough, because there's always a glamorization, especially with the Shark Tanks of the world, that, hey, being an entrepreneur, being a billionaire is cool. But there's a lot of other variables that are happening behind the scenes that people don't really pay attention to. So I appreciate you shedding the light on that as well. Now, diving deeper into Newslaundry, right? And pay to keep news free is something that you guys talk about a lot, and you were one of the pioneers in the subscription model here. So I just wanted to know the business model angle of when you started, how much of a business decision it was, and how much was it a decision of just keeping news independent and things of that nature?
So actually, to be completely honest, it was the latter. It was more an indulgence and an idealistic position. But I would also not say that it was entirely at the cost of not having some sort of hunch that this is going to work commercially as well.
Right.
In fact, if you see a very old talk of mine, I think it's in the year 2012 or 13, when we had just started Newslaundry, Caravan, the magazine, they used to have these informal, I think every last weekend of the month or something, they used to have a little talk with people from the media industry talking about, ideas, things. So they had invited me to talk about Newslaundry, because that time Newslaundry was a novelty. It was,
right.
Now there are lots of digital platforms. That time we were one of the first few.
Right.
And we were one of the first few, and we were the only ones who said we will not take ads. We will be an ad-free platform.
Nice.
And in 2012, the CPI or CPM rate, the pre-roll YouTube ad was in between 350 to 400 rupees. No. Today it is, I think, between 30 to 50 rupees.
Right.
The Google ad was, I think, maybe 50 to 70 rupees CPI. Now it's 12 to 14 or 17 rupees. of course, so those have come crashing down. So, but at that time, someone in the audience asked me, what is your revenue model? What is your business plan? So at that time, I had said my business plan is dekhi jayegi. So now the thing is, I could do that because I had really fantastic co-founders, and we had a production house which was doing well. It was a profitable production house, and Newslaundry was excess capacity because you had a studio, we had cameras, we had lights, we had editing. So we just needed to hire 1 or 2 graphic designers and start and get people to write. And we didn't really have a bunch of reporters to begin with. It was just Madhu and me doing interviews.
I see.
But because Madhu being a veteran of the, and of course, one big head start I had is my co-founder was Madhu Trehan.
Right.
So I didn't really have to prove my chops. You know, it's like starting an acting school with Robert De Niro. You don't have to convince people that you could be a sidey from hell.
Right.
But my co-founder is Robert De Niro. I don't have to prove my chops.
I see what you mean.
So Madhu Trehan was my co-founder. So, you know, I could just, you know, work and, you know, in her reflected glory, get the initial fillip.
I see what you mean.
So we would just conduct interviews and put them up. And only later did we hire reporters and we, you know, made it its own company. But because Madhu had seen news up close, and she was the founder of India Today, the founder of Newstrack, the founder of TV Today, and I had worked in news right from 95 under her. She was my boss in Newstrack. I had seen how it had evolved and the roles ads played in it.
I see.
So, I mean, instinctively we knew that ads will not run news. News is going to fail. And of course, now news has gone completely insane.
We'll get to that.
In the late 2000s, it was mildly unhinged. It wasn't completely insane.
I agree.
And in that mildly unhinged phase, because Madhu and I knew many of the things that were happening behind the scenes, of who is invited as a panelist, why he or she is invited, who he or she is a consultant to behind the scenes, what he or she is talking about, who sponsors that show. We knew all this. So he was like, you know, this is such a con being played out.
Right.
Of course, now it's fashionable to abuse the media.
True.
Even, you know, people, I mean, I don't agree with him. I think he's a genius when it comes to engineering about the media. He doesn't understand Jack, is Elon Musk, who says, you are the media, Twitter is the media. It's like the barrier to entry in spaceships is much higher.
Of course.
Otherwise, it's like everybody gets $1 million, now everyone build their own spaceship and leave it out. You are the, you know,
space
it doesn't.
engineer.
The entire space is going to be one big mess. So I think his understanding of the media is very, you know, pedestrian and adolescent. But so we had seen that. So instinctively we knew ads is not the solution to funding media. So we said we will only keep it subscription and ad free. Although our tech aspect was hugely compromised at the time, our failure rate of the payment gateway was some insane 70%. Because we hadn't really spent money on the tech. We just put our website on WordPress.
Right.
We, you know, designed it, customized it, and we had said chalo dalo. And we had made some Jugaad type payment gateway. But yeah, so instinctively we knew ads cannot be the model. Instinctively we knew that we'll go ad free and subscription. But had we thought it through and said this is going to be the turnover, this is going to be the conversion rate, this is how it's going to, no, we hadn't done that. It was just instinct. And it was an indulgence because we hadn't taken money from any VC. We did not have to demonstrate return on capital, etc. So we let it prosper in its own time.
I see what you mean. It was a fantastic soup of a lot of things that worked, right? You and obviously Madhu being entrenched in the industry, knowing it enough to be able to understand what's working, what's not working, but also being adventurous enough and having a setup so you didn't have to do a lot of upfront investments. There was a lot of different variables and puzzle pieces just fit well in the time.
Because the investors came much later, almost 2-3 years later, when we realized, okay, we'll run this as its own entity.
I see.
The first year, 2 years, it was run as a side show. When we had time, chalo, we will give to Newslaundry. It wasn't being run with a full focus.
I see what you mean. Interesting. But it's a good perspective into how things evolve, right? You don't intend them to be what they are, but just snowball into...
and also another, you know, advice I always give to young potential entrepreneurs is work with co-founders, because there are moments which are very difficult, which can be very lonely, which can be extremely hard. Right. And if you're the only one shouldering that, it can potentially crush you or break you. But if you have co-founders with you, if you're going through a low patch, that person will carry you. And that person going through a low patch, you carry that person.
Right.
And as long as your basic value systems align, you're blessed. You don't have to agree on everything. There's always going to be friction. There's always going to be, conflict, which is like there is in family, there's with friends, there's will be with co-founders. But having a co-founder with the same basic value system as you is a huge source of strength and resilience. And entrepreneurship is all about resilience. Like 10 people will start with the same thing together. It's not like the others will be doing it any better or worse than the others. The one who gets tired first and stops falls off, and the one who just continues makes it.
That's a great way to look at things, especially in a world where there's a lot of copycat businesses. When you look at it from a macro lens, it makes a lot of sense. And you're right.
Resilience is key.
100%. And also having a co-founder, like you said, it sort of helps you share burdens. I've also heard about just co-founder synergies in terms of, hey, you are good at something, they're good at something.
Absolutely. Makes a big difference.
Great. Now, so we've delved in the past for a bit. Now, flipping the switch and looking into the future, right? So the two perhaps most important letters for our generation, AI. So there's an opportunity and a challenge. Opportunity in the sense that it is easier to create content at scale, but then there's the Pandora's box of, hey, hallucination and deep fakes and stuff that I can't even imagine that ChatGPT would be doing a year from now. So in that strange flux where there's obviously lower barrier to entry to creating content, but also just a whole can of worms being opened by, it's very difficult to control what's true, what's factual, what's not factual. How do you navigate this flux in content creation, especially in your industry where facts are important?
Well, I'm not sure about that today's day and age, but yeah, for journalism, facts are sacrosanct. They're key, but the thing is, journalism in today's day and age is become this word that means different things to different people. Many look at influencers as journalists. Many people look at just commentariat as journalists. So I think the new phrases, new terminologies will have to be evolved to really accurately describe what it is that one does. Now, AI is a fantastic tool, and the opportunities exist, when it comes to writing copy, checking copy. If you want to, go through hundreds of pages about something and just juice out the relevant stuff. But at least so far, according to me, the journalism angle of news, because news is the bigger term, journalism is a part of news. Journalism are the pillars on which a news platform, channel, magazine, newspaper stands.
Right.
Now, the news platform product will have commentary, we have satire shows, it will have explainers, it will have infographics. But the fundamental pillars of any news platform is journalism, and journalism is all about first-hand on-ground reporting. And if it's not first-hand on-ground, if it could be data sourced, but it has to be done by a person understanding context, understanding why I'm doing the story, what is the motivation, what am I looking for. Like, you could download, the past 20 years of balance sheets from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs website of a company. But until you know the angle of the story, you don't know what you're looking at. And AI can be asked to get out relevant stuff, but what do you want to do with it? Right. You want to tie this to, let's say, XYZ minister who was a director in this company, and then you want to tie it into yet another contract that was awarded to his or her sister-in-law for, you know what I'm saying, right? Or go on the ground and say, okay, this is where an incident happened. This is where, the police came. This is where, and then this was the person there at that time. But if this person says I was there at 9:30 in the morning, but this didn't happen at 9 in the morning, then this person's testimony is not credible. So journalist has to make a lot of judgment calls. Right. So I think journalism is not threatened by AI. Certain jobs in a newsroom are. Right. Rewriting, the desk could be threatened, design could be threatened, video editing could be threatened. And that is a huge worry, I think, for India in particular and the world in general, because I don't want to get into that because that the more jobs that AI takes, there's going to be a more concentration of wealth into the big companies that control AI, because it is very difficult to catch up with AI companies because the amount of data that you need to actually train your LLMs on,
Right.
you don't have access to. Just like, the barrier to entry in auto is very high.
True.
The barrier to entry in making a rocket company is very high.
True.
The barrier to entry in AI is even higher.
Right.
Because the amount of access that some of these existing giant companies have access to train their LLM.
Insane.
Someone who starts off today, no matter how good their product, they don't have access to that kind of data. And now with time going by, there are going to be rules and regulations that will come into play.
Absolutely.
And the regulatory framework around what you are allowed to train your data, your LLMs on, I think is going to become more restrictive. Then there's no way you can catch up with them. So I think for that reason, one will have to really reimagine, which I think Mark Zuckerberg had spoken about many years ago, the social contract, because the concentration of wealth into fewer hands is going to increase. There'll be fewer jobs. I'm quite certain there'll be fewer jobs. And in the news world, some jobs will be lost. But journalism cannot be done by AI the way I understand AI right now. Maybe I'll be proved wrong later, but as of today's understanding, journalism has to have an editor who has to set context. It has to have certain sub-editors who get what we're going for, and the reporter has to understand the context and then source the information accordingly.
Interesting. Yeah. So the distinction between journalism and it being the foundation for news is something it's very educational for a layperson like me, because I would just put everything under the umbrella of news. Hey, these are news people. But the understanding that there's layers to it, and it all starts with journalism, and then it funnels into different types of content and different types of delivery of that.
There's so many websites that people describe them to me as news websites. I say, can you name me one reporter that website has? I don't name them because some of them are such trashy websites. They just rehash shit and put it out. I'm like, name me one reporter. They cannot name me one reporter. That website will have one troll-like character who just churns out shit. Another who just sits and they have never gone on the ground and done any report. But they are described as news websites. I don't believe something that does not have reporters who are the first-hand tellers of a story are news websites. They can just be general commentary or blogs.
Interesting.
For news, your pillars, you cannot have a house without pillars.
Of course.
And you cannot have a news product without reporters.
It's a good perspective for me to look at things from now moving forward, because it's a good distinction to make in my mind when it comes to how news is made, right? Shifting from how news is made into what news is made into. So we talk about different content formats, and we live in a world where everybody's just scrolling through short form content. But we also live in a world where podcasts are suddenly blowing up. So from content format, what have you seen, long form content versus short, audio versus video versus text? So because you've been creating content for a long time now, right? And obviously consumption trends have changed. So what were the key macro trends you've seen change, and anything that you see now happening as we move closer and closer to the attention span of a goldfish?
Well, I think different things have been reinterpreted in different phases of the learning curve. The macro picture and the micro picture can be very contrasting depending on which subset of the industry you belong to. When we had started Newslaundry, the conventional thinking, and because we worked closely with YouTube at the time, and YouTube was, encouraging digital creators to do stuff, whether it was food shows, whether it was news, whether it was news analysis, whether it was news critique, whether it was stand-up comedy. That 3 to 5 minutes is the optimum length of video. And that was the kind of conventional logic that was given to everybody. But in our product, we realized that was not true. For our product, which was not based on ads, which was not based on clickbait, 25-minute videos sometimes led to more subscriptions than a 4-minute video. That may get more views.
Interesting.
But even that's not necessarily get more views. It may not. So for news, the logic may not be the same for just general, top 10 fails kind of video.
Right.
So I think, now they have started, fragmenting the data, even Google, because I attend a lot of their conferences. But back then it was that this is the logic for video.
I see.
By video, if you are telling me how to make, the best Bengan ka bharta, you cannot show in 4 minutes.
Right.
If Tarla Dalal is showing it, do this, do that, people will watch it for longer.
True.
If you just want to amuse me, then maybe 4 minutes or 3 minutes is good. So it really depended on what. And with podcasts, now some of the top podcasts in the world are like 1, 2, 3, 4 hours long. It's a way more immersive experience, and you can multitask. I'm product addict. But that's because I'm listening to it while driving, I'm listening to it while I'm exercising, I'm listening to it while I'm getting dressed or bathing. It's just always playing. There's a podcast always playing. In a day, I listen to probably anything from an hour and a half to 3.5 hours of podcasts. Because whether you're in traffic, whether you're getting dressed, whether you're taking a walk, running, gymming, you tend to listen to stuff because you can do it. And because of that, you will listen to it for longer. And because you will listen to it for longer, you get immersed into the idea a lot more.
Got it.
The logic for video is very different. The logic for text is very different. I just find, and maybe that's an age thing, I find my eyes get tired when I read too much, especially off screens.
I see.
And the most while reading, so I prefer listening. So like The Economist, I can read the article or I can listen to the article. It's the same article, but I listen to it.
Interesting.
Because my eyes start watering when I'm, on it for too long.
Makes sense.
So I think for a news product, you have to have all three.
Right.
And your own data you have access to will show you what kind of engagement which of those formats gets.
I see.
And for what kind of news content. For a particular kind of news content, podcasts could work better. For another kind of news content, videos could work better. For another kind of news content, text could work better.
Got it.
So that actually, I personally don't prescribe this is the rule.
I see.
It could be different for different products and different people.
Got it. So there's no one size fits all kind of situation.
For big data, there is. If you want to set up a platform for video, then you can.
Right.
But if you're doing a news product and your product, like YouTube as a product, doesn't have an identity. YouTube is just video. It has everything from, some of the best reruns of some of the finest shows and films from the 50s and 60s to the most B-grade, crap that you have these days. So it's not like YouTube, this is the brand of the YouTube. There's no YouTube. It's not
sense.
YouTube is not The Economist,
Right.
or whatever, Miss Malini or Bollywood Reporter or whatever it is. Each of these brands has an identity. This is what I'm doing. This is what my brand represents. Companies like YouTube or Twitter do not have that brand representation. So I think the logic, if you're looking at a big multi-billion-dollar company, then you will go at purely, you will not look at details.
I see what you mean.
But if you're looking at things our size, because I think the future of news is not, these huge behemoths that used to exist, the Times group and this group and that group. I think going forward, the future of news is hundreds of Newslaundries in different languages with smaller turnovers, anything from crore to 20-30 crore.
I see.
Then when they come together, or whether they will come under some conglomerate, that's a separate matter. But the days of how we understood as news media companies, I don't think those days are going to stay very long, because just the economics of it doesn't work out.
I see what you mean. Interesting. So from a content perspective, obviously you mentioned it's the type of content and the context in which it's being consumed is something that decides what format it should be and what format works. But it's an interesting point that you mentioned. If I may take a quick tangent, you mentioned the evolution of news and how you see news businesses evolving in the future. So if I may ask a question that's slightly personal to me, is I find news very stressful in general. So whether it's just a debate, and I'm using that term loosely, the debate format, whether it's just clickbait, whether it's just echo chamber of specific schools of thoughts, or just sensationalization, just overemphasis on negative stuff that's happening. So all of that subconsciously has made me reduce my consumption of news. So do you see that taking a turn for the better, or am I just being overly concerned?
No. In fact, what you have said, Google in its last report, and not just Google, Reuters in partnership with, I think, the University of Oxford, if I'm not wrong, even they released a report which showed, they looked at 20 countries. News consumption is down among young people such as yourself, purely because it is very stressful and toxic. So it is a worldwide phenomena, and I think it's completely justifiable. And I think it's also healthy in one sense. I mean, when I'm invited to colleges and schools to speak, and they ask me often that where should we get our news from? I said, why do you want to get news? This is not your age to get news, because news is so polarizing. And in the beauty about youth is that, like, some of the people who I grew up with, our political views are very different.
Right.
But we're still really good friends because we had a patch, the 70s, 80s, and to an extent even the 90s, early 90s, were internet-free days. I don't remember opening a newspaper and reading it. We only used to just turn it over and do this and read the sports page and the last thing. I mean, I will not say it because some people look at me and this guy is running, Newslaundry. But some of the most dramatic things that happened in the 80s, I didn't get from the newspaper, although we read the newspaper that morning because we never saw the front page. Later, when we were walking, someone said, "Oh, such and such thing is happening." We said, "Really?" So I tell them, don't look at news because you'll just fight amongst each other. You'll just read the sports page and that's it. And then, unless you're doing UPS, then start consuming news.
Different ball game.
So, that is a worldwide phenomenon. I personally think it's fantastic if people stop watching the news because it will force the news to change. I think it's important to make an industry completely irrelevant in order to get them to reinvent themselves. I think a certain market will always be there for news because people need to know, because the political economy and the economy and livelihoods and our lives are very deeply interlinked to what happens in the world. When it comes to the debates, as you said loosely, use the shouting matches, that's because the line between reality shows and news is blurred. You just want a cockfight, whether it is KRK fighting with Rakhi Sawant or Dolly Bindra throwing a glass at Manoj Tiwari. It's the same thing, Manoj Tiwari as an MP sitting and doing the same thing with someone else from the other side. It's just become one big reality show.
Right.
And there's a market for that, and I guess in one sense it was always there, but earlier people got it from shows like Jerry Springer or Jersey Shore or Big Boss. Now you can get a sasta version of that in a TV studio. And you don't really need to follow weeks of contestants. You can just see the contestant in 1 hour and they can spit on each other and get on with it. So I think that market will always be there.
Right.
But how news negotiates this space and keeps itself relevant, I think is the challenge of our times, which is, I think it's a very interesting time to be in the news business. And we have our ideas of how we will negotiate the space. Others may have their ideas. But I think something has to change, and it will.
And just speaking as an individual, I'm appreciative of the fact that somebody like you is, and I'm sure there's others that I've not heard of yet. You guys are working towards changing that narrative of, hey, the news is something we should stay away from, because you're right. It's something that it's a necessary thing for society, right, to know what's happening around us. So I'm very optimistic that things will change, and with people like you at the helm, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Now, being cognizant of your time, let's jump to the last question. What's next? So you've come this far, obviously, but what's the next chapter for Newslaundry, for you, for your team?
I think we want to set up collaborations to kind of optimize this space. We already have a partnership with the News Minute. It's a joint subscription. We don't run as one company, but quite close. Right. We talk on a daily basis. At least their CEO Vignesh and I talk almost every day. We know that many of our editorial leadership positions talk every day, but the idea is that to become very, very closely aligned and run almost as a single entity, and then get others to collaborate with us, to collaborate and grow. And I think that kind of collaboration will lead to a certain robustness in the digital news world of at least a few entities to be able to do this. From there, I really don't know which way the industry will go. I just think that the most adaptable will survive. So you have to, be a gorilla and roll with the grenades, as they say. Right. So you will just have to evolve with revenue models. There have to be multiple revenue streams, subscription being the most significant one, but it cannot be the only one. You'll have to have, 2 or 3 smaller revenue streams. And of course, how you optimize your stories for formats will also be key to your survival. Technology will play a huge role. And the one thing that is not spoken about enough, in the news world, government policy will play a very big role. And other than the government, I don't think many people know that, which is why the government uses policy to control news. It is one of the most, you think about the sectors that are highly regulated. There is mining for clear environmental reasons and livelihood reasons. Energy, because most of energy comes from a resource just like mining, which is a shared resource, no one can own that. Right. So it is highly regulated, how much a private company benefits, how much the society benefits. Right. Spectrum allocation, telecom is highly regulated because spectrum is a public resource, etc. Water is a highly regulated industry. I mean, you cannot just block off a dam and say all this water is mine, and the reasons for these are clear. They are either public goods or there's a huge ecological or environmental impact. There is a huge social impact, etc. The other product that is very unlike all these, which is as regulated as this, is news. And you got to think why. One aspect, of course, is that it has a social impact, but then so does cinema. True. But yet it is not as regulated as news. So news is, government policy plays a huge role. And if the government wants, it can be a booming industry. If the government wants, it can kill this industry.
I see what you mean.
So that is something that I don't think is discussed enough by policy wonks. Because most people who are in the government will not talk about it.
Of course.
And most people who are, earlier in the government will be seen as politicians, whining about our time was better than their time. But one needs to have a really good and honest discussion about what is government policy doing to make news better.
That's a question perhaps we need to ask in Thailand as well, but that's a whole different kind of worms.
Right.
You're right. It's something we don't talk about enough, don't think about enough, but it's a conversation we need to have.
Sure.
But Abhinandan, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
It was very insightful. A lot of things I learned about how things work behind the scenes. But it's been a pleasure, and I hope to reciprocate when you visit Thailand next, or your first trip to Thailand, in fact.
Whenever I come, yes.
Fingers crossed. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks to everybody who tuned in. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. We'll see you in the next episode.
Okay, great.
It was fun. I hope